Do you really think anyone will believe you? A waitress who can't even afford her mother's medicine? That was the line. The one that cut through the jazz, the laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses worth more than a year of her rent. The one that made every diamond in the room lose its shine. The Monteleone Hotel in New Orleans was dressed in gold that night. A charity gala, they called it, where politicians shook hands with billionaires and pretended to care about the poor while the help stayed invisible. Nora Sullivan, 27, stood at the back holding a tray of drinks she couldn't afford to taste. 4 years of this. 4 years of smiling at people who never learned her name, never met her eyes, never saw her as anything more than a uniform. She was a ghost by design, safe, forgettable, until she wasn't. It started with a spilled drink, a nervous laugh, then a slap, sharp, loud, unmistakable. Sienna Blake hit the marble floor, one hand on her pregnant belly, blood on her lip. Her husband, Senator Harrison Blake, guest of honor, future presidential candidate, stood over her like she was nothing. No one moved. Not the governors, not the CEOs, not the cameras. Fear is expensive, and everyone in that room had too much to lose. Everyone but Nora. She didn't plan to be a hero. She didn't even know if her voice would come out, but it did. Stop, she's pregnant. Harrison turned slowly, his eyes cold as a courtroom verdict. And when he saw who dared to speak a waitress in a wrinkled uniform, hands still trembling, he smiled. The kind of smile that has ended careers, buried scandals, silenced witnesses. "And who's going to stop me?" he said. "You?" Then he hit her too. But Nora didn't fall, didn't cry, didn't run. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a cracked phone, and hit record. "I don't need them to believe me," she said quietly. "I just need them to see." What she didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that a man stood watching from the shadows, a man whose empire was built on blood and silence, a man who had spent 3 years searching for proof that his sister was being destroyed. Roman Callahan stepped out of the darkness. His eyes didn't land on Harrison. They landed on her, the woman who had done what no one else dared. She didn't know it yet, but that one moment would burn a senator's empire to the ground, ignite a war between power and truth, and spark something between two people who were never supposed to meet. This is not just a story about justice. This is a story about a woman who refused to be invisible and the dangerous man who saw her anyway. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because Nora's fight is just beginning. The tension shifted instantly. It wasn't just the scandal anymore, but the presence of the man who had just stepped out of the shadows. Roman Callahan. That name rippled through the crowd like a whispered wave. Governors backed away. Chief executive officers held their breath. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Because everyone knew who Roman Callahan was. Not a politician, not a businessman, but a man who held an empire built on blood and silence in the palm of his hand. People said that if you ever saw Roman Callahan step out of the dark, then either you were being protected or you were about to disappear. Harrison recognized him instantly. The senator's face drained of color in a blink, and then he tried to pull himself back together. But it was too late. Everyone had seen that moment. The moment his power wavered. Roman did not look at Harrison. He walked straight to Nora. She was still standing there, phone in hand, her cheek flushed from the slap, her heart hammering out of control. He stopped in front of her, his voice low and deep. "Are you hurt?" Nora looked up at him. His eyes were cold as ice, but there was something else inside them. Not a threat, concern. She didn't understand. "Who are you?" Roman did not answer. He only held her gaze for one more second, as if committing her face to memory, then turned to Harrison. And when he spoke, his voice was steel. "Touch my sister one more time, and I will bury you so deep that even God won't be able to find you." The entire room went rigid with shock. His sister, Sienna Blake, the wife of Senator Harrison Blake, was Roman Callahan's sister. Eyes swung toward Sienna, still kneeling on the marble floor, one hand cradling her pregnant belly, the other bracing her trembling body. No one had known. For 3 years, no one had known she had a brother like that. Harrison tried to reclaim the upper hand. He straightened, tugged his suit jacket into place, and gave a thin smile. "This is a family matter, Callahan. Walk away." Roman didn't move. "She stopped being your family the moment you made her bleed." Harrison stepped forward, his voice edged with defiance. "You think you can threaten a United States senator? Out here? In public?" Roman tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Not a threat. A promise. The tension rose to a breaking point. Two forces faced each other in the middle of a room filled with the most powerful people in America. Yet no one dared to intervene, because they knew Harrison Blake had the law, the media, and even the White House behind him. But Roman Callahan had something the law could not touch, and in this room, there were far too many people who owed him favors. Harrison understood that. He didn't dare do anything more. He just stood there, fists clenched, eyes blazing with hatred, but his mouth sealed shut. Roman signaled to a tall man standing nearby. "Declan, take her." Declan moved to Sienna and gently helped her to her feet. Sienna trembled as she looked at Harrison, then at Roman. In her eyes there was fear, confusion, and something else too. Hope. For the first time in 3 years, she chose to go with her brother. As Sienna was led away, Roman turned back to Nora one last time. She was still standing there, unmoving, still holding the phone with its cracked screen. He didn't say much, just 2 words, "I'll find you." Then he stepped back into the shadows, vanishing as if he had never been there at all. Nora didn't know whether it was a promise or a threat. She only knew that her life had just changed forever. Slowly, the room began to breathe again. Whispers, hurried footsteps, the click and flash of cameras starting up once more. Harrison stood alone in the center of the dance floor, his face burning red with rage and humiliation. He stared at Nora with eyes that promised revenge. But she didn't shake. She had been hit. She had been humiliated. She had lost everything she had built. But in her hand, she still had the phone. And inside that phone was the truth. Nora made it back to her shabby studio apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning. She didn't turn on the light. She just sat down on the worn-out chair by the window and stared out at the city, swallowed by darkness. Her cheek still burned, still stamped with the imprint of Harrison Blake's hand. She lifted her fingers to it, feeling the dull ache spread beneath the skin. But it was fine. She'd been used to pain for a long time. The phone lay in her hand, the screen cracked, but the video was still there. Proof. The truth. The only thing she had. She fixed her gaze on the black screen, and memory came rushing back like a flood. When she was 12 years old, her father left. Without a single explanation, without a goodbye, just a scrap of paper on the table and a mountain of debt in his wake. Her mother, Margaret, had to work 3 jobs at once to raise 2 children. By day, she was a cashier at the supermarket. In the early evening, she washed dishes at a restaurant. Late at night, she cleaned office buildings. Nora watched her mother grow thinner by the day, watched wrinkles appear on a face that had once been bright with life, watched hands turn rough and calloused from being pushed past their limits. But her mother never complained, never cried in front of her children. She only said that everything would be all right. Then, when Nora was 23, everything collapsed. Stage 3 lung cancer. The doctor said chemotherapy had to start immediately. Nora looked at the number on the bill and knew her dream was over. She was in her 3rd year of law school, top of her class, a wide future opening in front of her. But that future had a price, and she didn't have the money. She dropped out. Not for 1 second did she hesitate, because her little brother, Ethan, 19 years old, had just been accepted to medical school. He was smart, hardworking, and he deserved a life better than the one they'd been handed. Nora swore she'd give him the chance she'd never been able to have, no matter what she had to trade away. 4 years as a waitress. 4 years learning how to become invisible. Don't look customers in the eye. Don't have opinions. Don't exist. Just a uniform moving between tables, serving people who never bothered to remember her name. She had heard enough. Smile more, sweetheart. You're prettier when you don't talk. She had felt enough. Hands groping when she passed by. Eyes that looked at her as if she were merchandise. She had watched coworkers get fired for daring to refuse a VIP guest. And she learned the most important lesson of all. Invisible meant safe. Silence meant survival. She swallowed everything down, smiled, kept going. Day after day, month after month, year after year. Until tonight, Nora looked down at the phone in her hand. The video was still there. Harrison Blake's face, the sound of the slap cutting through the air, Sienna falling to the floor, and her own voice, clear as a bell. Stop, she's pregnant. For the first time in 4 years, Nora Sullivan was no longer invisible. The whole world was about to see her. She didn't know if that was good or bad. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But there was one thing she knew for certain. Life would never be the same again. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what she needed. 24 hours later, A knock sounded at the door of Nora's shabby apartment. She startled, then moved quietly to peer through the narrow gap. A tall man stood outside, his face cold as stone, his gaze sharp and unblinking. She recognized him at once, the man who had taken Sienna away that night. Nora opened the door, but she didn't step out. "Miss Sullivan, someone wants to see you." Nora crossed her arms over her chest. "And if I refuse, then what?" The man's expression didn't change. "He said you'd ask that. He also told me to tell you this is about the woman you saved." Nora went silent for a long moment. The image of Sienna collapsing onto the marble floor flashed through her mind. Blood on her lip, a hand protecting her pregnant belly, terror in her eyes. Nora let out a breath, grabbed her coat, and followed the man. They stopped in front of an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. A closed sign hung on the glass door, but the lights were still on inside. The man opened the door for her, then remained outside like a statue on guard. Nora stepped in. The restaurant was empty, except for one person seated at the middle table, Roman Callahan. He sat alone, his eyes cold as ice, yet there was something deep beneath the surface that she couldn't read. A glass of red wine, untouched, waited in front of him. When she approached, he didn't stand. He only motioned for her to sit in the chair across from him. Nora sat, but she didn't touch anything. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Who are you? Who are you really?" Roman leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "The man who's been waiting 3 years for proof that bastard is a monster." Nora stayed quiet, waiting, and Roman began to tell his story. Sienna was his half-sister, sharing the same mother but not the same father, 10 years younger than he was. When his father was killed, she had been only 8 years old. Roman didn't describe the death in detail, but his eyes darkened in a single, unmistakable moment. He raised his sister, protected her from the black world he lived in. Sienna was his only light, the only person he wanted to keep clean, far from every stain of the Callahan empire. 4 years ago, Sienna met Harrison Blake at a charity event. She fell in love with him. She wanted to marry him. Roman fought it fiercely. He didn't trust Harrison, didn't trust that perfect smile and the sweet promises of that politician. But Sienna insisted. "I want a normal life, far away from your world." Those words cut into Roman like a knife, and he let her go, a decision he regretted every day after that. For 3 years, Roman suspected Harrison was hurting his sister. He saw the small changes. Sienna smiled less, called less, always wore long sleeves even in summer, but every time he asked, she denied it, defended her husband, said he was imagining too much. Without proof, Roman couldn't do anything. Until that night, until you showed up. He looked at Nora, his eyes hard with resolve. "Your video is the first proof I've ever had. I need more. I need you to testify." Nora almost laughed. "Testify against a senator? Are you out of your mind?" Roman didn't budge. "He'll come after you whether you testify or not. At least this way, you get to hit back." Nora fell silent. She knew he was right. Harrison Blake wasn't the kind of man who would let go of someone who had humiliated him. Roman went on. "Help me destroy him, and in return, I'll cover your mother's medical bills, your brother's tuition, a life where you won't have to disappear anymore." Nora studied him for a long time. Then she shook her head. "I don't want your money." Roman looked surprised, his head tilting slightly. "Then what do you want?" "Safety. For my family. Not wealth, just safety." Something shifted in Roman's eyes. For the first time, he didn't look at her like a tool, but like a human being. Someone who deserved respect. "Then you'll have it." "My word." Nora nodded. The deal was sealed, not with ink, but with a look. Roman rose, fastening the button of his suit jacket. "Welcome to the war, Miss Sullivan." Nora stepped out of the restaurant and drew in a deep breath. She had just made a bargain with the devil. She knew that. But when you have nothing left to lose, the devil is sometimes the only choice. The next morning, Nora was summoned to the manager's office at the Monteleone Hotel. She knew what was waiting for her before she ever stepped through that door. The manager sat behind his desk, his face flat and cold, and he didn't bother to offer her a seat. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Nora stood there and felt each word like a bullet punching straight through her chest. For what reason? For stopping a man from hitting his wife? The manager looked at her as if she were an irritating insect. For humiliating a United States senator in front of 200 guests, Nora tried to explain. He was the one who... But the manager cut her off at once. "Senator Blake is a friend of this hotel. You are not. Clear out your locker. 4 years of work. over in 4 minutes. Nora walked out of the hotel with the sickening sensation of being punched in the gut. She'd sacrificed too much for that job, swallowed humiliation, smiled, made herself disappear, and this was how they treated her. On the way home, her phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. Delete the video. If you don't, your mother's next chemotherapy session will be her last. Nora's hand started to shake. She stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, her heart crashing wildly against her ribs. Then another message arrived. This time it was a photograph. Her mother walking into the hospital, taken from a distance. Clear, threatening. Harrison Blake wasn't joking. He was watching. He knew where her mother was, where she was being treated, which route she took. Nora sank onto a park bench nearby, forcing herself to breathe. She could delete the video, disappear, go back to being invisible, safe. But then she remembered Roman's words. He'll come after you whether you testify or not. She looked at the video on her phone. Harrison's face. The crack of the slap. Sienna falling to the floor. Blood on her mouth. Fear in her eyes. If Nora stayed silent, Sienna would keep suffering. If Nora vanished, Harrison would keep hitting her. And if she was going to be hunted either way, then at least she would fight. Nora opened a social media app. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't stop. She posted the video. She didn't wait for Roman. She didn't wait for a lawyer. She didn't wait for anyone's permission. A short caption. This is Senator Harrison Blake. This is what power looks like when no one is watching. She hit post and closed her eyes. The video detonated like a bomb. 6 hours later, 5 million views. 12 hours later, the hashtag Justice for Sienna climbed into nationwide trends. 24 hours later, CNN, Fox, NBC, and every major network was running the story. Nora Sullivan, an unknown waitress, suddenly became the center of the entire United States. But Harrison Blake wasn't a man who fell easily. He held an emergency press conference, standing behind dozens of microphones with a perfectly staged face of pain. This video is a fabrication created with deepfake technology. This is a coordinated attack by my political opponents. The woman in the video is a disgruntled employee with a history of misconduct. Harrison's public relations team began digging into Nora's past. Everything was dragged into the light. A father who left, debts piling up, a gravely ill mother, dropping out of school halfway through. They painted the picture of a desperate woman, willing to do anything for money. A new hashtag appeared, fake video, Nora the gold digger. Public opinion split into two sides. Half believed Nora, backed her fiercely, called her a hero. Half believed Harrison, a powerful senator, a future presidential candidate, the man with the perfect smile on every poster. Cruel comments flooded Nora's personal page. She's lying for money. Who is she to accuse him? She must have slept with his enemies. Nora sat in her shabby apartment, reading line after line, her hands trembling. She began to doubt herself. Was it worth it? Did anyone truly believe her? Or was she just a pawn in the game of powerful men? Her phone buzzed. A message from Roman. You moved faster than I thought. Bold. Now they're coming for you. I'll get there sooner. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Nora opened it. Declan stood outside, his face still cold as stone. Pack your things. You're not safe here anymore. Nora looked around the shabby studio, the place where she'd tried to keep existing for 4 years. The damp, stained walls, the worn-out chair by the window, the stack of unpaid bills on the table. This was everything she had, and now she was leaving it all behind. She grabbed a small bag and stuffed in a few changes of clothes, took her phone, stepped outside, didn't look back. Nora Sullivan's old life ended in that moment, and the real war began. Declan brought Nora to a hidden apartment in the outskirts of Boston. It was one of Roman's safe places, a refuge no one could find except the few people he trusted most. When she stepped inside, Nora saw Sienna sitting on the sofa, both hands cradling her pregnant belly, her gaze fixed on the window. Nora thought this moment would be different. She thought Sienna would be grateful, would stand with her, would fight beside her against the man who had abused her for years. She was completely wrong. Sienna shot to her feet the instant she saw Nora. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from fury. You're the one who posted that video. Nora stood rooted to the spot, stunned by the reaction. I was only trying to help. Sienna moved toward her, her voice sharp with bitterness. Help? You call that help? Do you have any idea what you've done? Nora tried to explain. He was hurting you. Everyone saw it. Sienna gave a thin laugh, but there was no joy in it. Everyone saw me on the floor like a victim. Everyone saw my husband's face. My son is going to grow up and see that video. Nora didn't back down. Your son is going to grow up safe because of that video, Sienna screamed, her voice breaking apart. You don't know anything about my life. You're just a waitress who showed up at the right moment and thinks she can save everything. But you don't understand anything. You don't understand anything at all. Nora stood there and took the storm, the rage of the woman she'd risked everything to protect. She didn't understand. She truly didn't. Sienna drew a deep breath, forcing herself to steady. I'm not going to testify. I'm not going to help you or anyone. Harrison just made a mistake. He's under a lot of pressure. The campaign, the work, everything is weighing on him. Nora was so shocked she almost laughed. A mistake? He hit you in front of 200 people. Sienna looked at her with a cold, flat stare. And I'll handle this myself. My way, not your way. Roman had been silent through the entire exchange, watching the two women collide. Now he stepped forward and placed a hand on Sienna's shoulder. Enough. Sienna turned to him, her voice laced with contempt. You brought her here. You thought she could fix everything? A waitress? Roman looked at his sister, his voice low and heavy with sorrow. She did what you couldn't do for the past 3 years. She stood up. The words struck Sienna like a slap. She froze, lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came. Then she turned away, walked into the bedroom, and slammed the door. Silence sank over the room. Nora stared at the closed door, feeling as if something inside her had caved in. Why doesn't she want help? I don't understand. Roman exhaled, his voice tired. She's been conditioned to protect him. That isn't her fault. That's what abuse does. It was only one explanation, but Nora understood everything. She'd seen this before, not in herself, but in other women. Women who were beaten and still went back. Women who were humiliated and still defended the one who hurt them. It wasn't weakness. It was a kind of invisible prison, built over years from fear and manipulation. Nora looked at Roman. Then we don't just need proof. We need her to see who he really is. Roman looked at her, and something shifted in his eyes. It wasn't only respect anymore. It was something deeper. Yes, that's what we need. Nora didn't give up. She knew that behind that door, a woman was wrestling with herself, fighting the lies she'd repeated for years, trying to protect the man who had been destroying her, day after day. And sometimes the hardest war isn't with the enemy outside, but with the fear living inside your own bones. That very night, Roman brought Nora's entire family to his estate outside Boston. This wasn't an ordinary house. It was a fortress. High walls ringed the property. Security cameras watched from every angle, and guards patrolled 24 hours a day. Nora's mother, Margaret, was escorted into a spacious room with a private doctor standing by. Ethan was given his own room and was protected at all times. Everyone was safe. Everyone was cared for, but Nora felt as if she couldn't breathe. On her second day at the estate, she confronted Roman right there in the living room. I didn't ask to be locked away. Roman was reading through a stack of files and didn't bother to look up. You're not locked away. You're being protected. Nora folded her arms across her chest. What's the difference? This time Roman looked up, his gaze cold and sharp. There is one. One keeps you alive. Nora wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. She hated this feeling. Hated owing anyone. Hated being controlled. All her life she'd taken care of herself, made her own decisions, and carried the consequences on her own back. And now she was living in a mafia boss's house, eating his food, being guarded by his men. Who was she in all of this? A pawn, a tool, or a prisoner being treated kindly? Roman seemed to read her thoughts. He set the files down and met her eyes. You don't owe me anything. This is the deal. You help me. I protect you. No other strings. Nora didn't answer. She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes follow her. Roman was used to giving orders, used to being obeyed. He wasn't used to being challenged, wasn't used to someone looking him straight in the eye and refusing to bow. But Nora Sullivan wasn't ordinary, and maybe, somewhere deep inside, he was beginning to respect that stubbornness. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She stepped out onto the balcony and looked down at the vast garden drowned in darkness. The night air was cool, but she didn't feel cold. Her mind was spinning with too many thoughts. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn, but she knew who it was. Roman stood beside her and handed her a glass of wine. She took it but didn't drink. They stood there in silence for a long time, staring out into the dark. Then Nora spoke. What kind of man are you? Really? Roman didn't answer right away. He took a sip, his eyes distant. The kind of man my father made. Nora waited, and Roman began to tell her. His father was killed when Roman was 18, by a corrupt politician who wanted to seize the Callahan Empire. They shot him right in front of Roman. He watched his father collapse, blood spreading across the cold stone floor. And in that moment, the 18-year-old boy died. In his place was a man who had to carry everything. I took over too young, too angry. I did things to survive, to protect what was left of my family, things I can't undo. He paused, looking down at the wine in his hand. I built an empire on blood. I'm not proud of it, but I won't apologize for keeping my people alive. Nora looked at him, not with fear, not with disgust, but with understanding. She saw a man carrying too much weight on his shoulders, a man who had sacrificed his youth, his innocence, everything, just to protect the people he loved. Do you regret it? Roman was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice turned rough. I regret that I couldn't give Sienna a normal life. I regret that she ran from me and straight into his hands. Nora studied him. You blame yourself. Roman gave a thin, bitter smile. Shouldn't I? She chose him because she wanted to get away from my world. Nora shook her head. She made her choice. You can't control everyone. Roman turned to her, and their eyes met in the dark. No, but I can protect the ones who let me. A moment passed. No one spoke, but they both felt something shifting between them. An invisible thread tying two people from two completely different worlds. Roman straightened and set his glass down on the railing. Get some sleep. Tomorrow won't be any easier. Nora looked at him. Is it ever easy? Roman stopped at the doorway and didn't turn back. No, but at least now, you're not alone anymore. Then he stepped into the darkness and disappeared. Nora remained there a long while, staring after him. And she realized something. Beneath the ice and the power, Roman Callahan was a man who had lost too much. And maybe she had too. 3 days later, Nora's phone received a message from an unknown number. I've been watching Blake for 5 years. He isn't just an abuser. He's a monster. Meet me. Nora showed the message to Roman. He frowned, fell silent for a moment, then nodded. Audrey Chen, an independent investigative journalist, 34 years old, sharp as a razor, and one of the few people in the media world who can't be bought. If she wants to meet, it means she's got something worth having. They met Audrey at a small cafe on the outskirts, a place with no cameras and no eyes belonging to Harrison. Audrey was an Asian woman with short-cut black hair, a keen gaze, and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much darkness in her life. She set a thick briefcase on the table, looking at Nora and Roman with a serious, steady stare. Everything I'm about to show you could get us killed. But the world needs to know. She opened the case and pulled out stacks of documents, photographs, copied emails, and financial reports. Nora stared at the paper spread, her heart beating faster. Audrey began to explain. Harrison Blake isn't just an ordinary corrupt senator. He's the center of a massive criminal network. First, human trafficking, a pipeline from Mexico bringing women and children into the United States. Harrison doesn't run it directly, but he takes protection money and uses his political influence to shield the people behind it. Every year, hundreds of victims pass through that pipeline, and Harrison takes a cut of the profits. Nora felt nausea rise in her throat. She looked at the stolen photographs, at the faces of women and children with hollow, frightened eyes. Audrey continued. Second, money laundering, through charitable foundations. That gala the other night is one of his biggest laundering channels. Tens of millions of dirty dollars get washed into legitimate donations. Wealthy people attend, they give, and they have no idea their money is being mixed with blood money. Nora remembered that night. The dazzling gowns, the expensive champagne, the polished smiles, all of it. A performance meant to hide a crime. Third, murder. Audrey slid a file toward them. 3 people who threatened to expose Harrison have either vanished or died in suspicious accidents. I have proof on one case, an email from Harrison ordering a witness to be handled. 2 weeks later, that person died in a car crash. No witnesses, no investigation. Roman sat as still as stone, his fists tightening until his knuckles went white. He'd suspected Harrison was dangerous, but this was far beyond anything he'd imagined. Audrey looked at both of them, her voice dropping lower. But this is the part that's going to hurt you. Nora frowned. What do you mean? Audrey pulled out another email. Blake didn't marry Sienna because he loved her. He married her to gain access. Nora didn't understand. Access to what? Audrey looked at Roman. He knew the Callahan family had its own network. Marrying Sienna was his way of laundering dirty money through her family without raising suspicion. Sienna was never a wife. She was a business transaction. She handed them an email Harrison had sent to a partner before the wedding. The Callahan girl is very naive. The perfect cover. Once we're married, their network becomes ours. Roman read the line, and his face twisted with pain and fury. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a blade driven into his chest. His sister, his only light, had never been loved. She had only been used. Nora looked at Roman, then turned to Audrey. Does Sienna know? Audrey shook her head. No. She still thinks he once loved her. That's why she's still clinging to him. Nora drew a long, steadying breath. Then she needs to know the truth. Roman spoke, his voice turned rough. If she knows, it could destroy her. Nora looked at him. Or it could set her free. Roman was silent for a long time. He stared into nothing, wrestling with himself. Then at last, he nodded. Show her, all of it. Audrey gathered the files. I'll prepare a full packet, but once we do this, there's no going back. Nora met her gaze, her voice calm but filled with resolve. There was never any going back. Not from the moment I hit record. Roman looked at Nora, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't read. Admiration, worry, or both. She didn't know. But she knew this much. The monster had stepped into the light, and now it was time to drag it fully into the open. The next day, Nora asked Roman to let her speak with Sienna alone. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He understood that sometimes a conversation between women could do more than anything he might say or do. Nora carried Audrey's file and stepped into the room where Sienna was sitting by herself. The young woman looked up as Nora entered, and her eyes turned cold at once. I already told you. I don't care. Nora didn't back down. She pulled out a chair and sat across from Sienna, setting the file on the table. Then just look at this. If after that you still want to protect him, I'll leave you alone. Sienna stared at the file as if it were a venomous snake. She didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know, but there was something in Nora's gaze that wouldn't let her refuse. Sincerity, resolve, and maybe a trace of compassion. Reluctantly, Sienna opened the file. The first photograph stole her breath. Women and children with hollow eyes, packed into dark containers, victims of the trafficking ring Harrison had been protecting. She turned the page. An email from Harrison ordering a witness to be dealt with. 2 weeks later, that person dead in an accident. Sienna's hands began to shake. She turned the page again, and then she saw it. The email Harrison had sent to his partner before their wedding. The Callahan girl is very naive. The perfect cover. Once we're married, their network becomes ours. Sienna read the lines again and again. Once, twice, 3 times, as if she were trying to find a way to misunderstand them. As if she were hoping this was only a nightmare. But the words stayed there. Cold, cruel, true. He never loved me. Sienna's voice broke. Nora looked at her, pain tightening in her chest. No, he never loved you. Sienna lifted her head, her eyes rimmed red. But what filled them now wasn't sorrow. It was anger. I thought if I was good enough, he'd stop. I thought it was my fault. Nora reached out and touched her hand. It was never your fault. None of it was your fault. Sienna began to cry, but this time they weren't tears of fear or despair. They were tears of rage, of awakening, of a woman finally seeing the truth. I want him to pay. I want to testify. Nora nodded. But there was a problem. Sienna had gone back to Harrison's mansion after the gala. He had forced her back, locked her up like a prisoner. No phone, no contact with the outside world. This conversation could only happen because Sienna had secretly used a maid's phone to reach Roman. Can you get out? Sienna thought for a moment. There's a gardener named Miguel. He used to work for my family. He's still loyal to Roman. They made a plan. Sienna would gather evidence inside the mansion. The things Harrison hid in his safe and on his personal laptop. When Harrison traveled to Washington for work, she would slip out through the back gate with Miguel's help. Declan would be waiting outside. 3 days later, the chance came. Harrison left that morning, flying to Washington for an important meeting. Sienna moved the moment his car disappeared from view. She went into Harrison's office and opened the safe using the code she had secretly seen many times. Inside was a portable hard drive, financial documents, and photographs she wished she had never laid eyes on. She took everything. Then she went into the bedroom and pulled out the photos of old injuries she had secretly taken over the past 3 years. Proof of the abuse she once believed she would never use. Miguel waited at the back gate. The old man nodded, said nothing, and guided her out along a path the cameras didn't cover. Declan was already waiting in a sleek black car. The instant Sienna slid into the back seat, Declan's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, and his face went pale. Someone tipped him off. Harrison is coming back. The car shot forward like a bullet. Sienna clutched her pregnant belly, her heart pounding out of control. In the rearview mirror, she saw 2 black vehicles in pursuit, drawing closer by the second. Declan drove like a professional racer, threading through lanes on the highway. Sienna fought not to scream as the car lurched through every turn. One vehicle tried to cut them off. Declan hit the gas and slipped into another lane by a hair's breadth. Horns blared, tires screamed against the road. Sienna closed her eyes and prayed. At last, after what felt endless, they got away. Declan shook the pursuers and brought Sienna to Roman's estate by a longer route. But when she stepped out of the car, she doubled over in pain. Her stomach seized in violent cramps. Something was wrong. A doctor was called in urgently. That whole night was hell. Sienna lay in bed, drenched in sweat, in pain and terror. The stress had nearly made her miscarry. The doctor did everything possible. And finally, at dawn, the danger passed. Both mother and baby were all right. Nora sat by Sienna's bedside when she woke. Sienna looked at her, eyes exhausted, but lit with something new. Hope. She reached for Nora's hand. You saved us. Both of us. Nora squeezed her hand and said nothing. Outside the bedroom door, Roman stood in silence, looking in. For the first time, his eyes were wet. The feelings he'd buried for so many years finally found their way out. His sister was safe. His niece or nephew was safe. And the woman who had made all of this happen was sitting at Sienna's bedside. Nora stepped out of the room and stood beside Roman. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They simply stood there, together, in silence. And sometimes, silence is all that's needed. That question haunted Roman all night long. How did Harrison know Sienna was running so quickly? The plan had been kept absolutely secret. Only a handful of people knew. And that could mean only one thing. There was a traitor inside the house. Roman ordered Declan to investigate at once. Every call, every message, every financial transaction, tied to every person in the organization, was combed through. No one was allowed to leave until they had an answer. 2 days later, Declan walked into Roman's office with a grim face. Connor, he'd worked for you for 8 years. Harrison bought him 6 months ago. He's been feeding them everything, schedules, locations, every plan we've made. Roman stood perfectly still. Connor. The man he'd trusted like a brother. The man who had stood beside him through countless wars. The man Roman believed would die for him if it came to that. Bring him to me. Connor was dragged into the room, his hands bound behind his back. He didn't try to run. He didn't try to explain. He only stood there with empty eyes, as if he'd accepted his fate a long time ago. Roman stepped in close, his voice ice cold, but with fury coiled beneath it, ready to strike. 8 years. I trusted you with my life. Connor lifted his head to meet Roman's gaze. Blake offered something more than trust. He offered freedom, a new identity, a way out. Roman gave a thin smile, but there was no humor in it at all. There's only one way out of this family. You know that. He drew his gun and set it on the desk. The sound of metal meeting wood rang out in a room so silent it felt suffocating. He looked at Connor, then his eyes shifted toward the doorway. Nora was standing there, seeing everything. She didn't know when she'd come in. She had heard noise and followed it. Now she stood there, staring at Roman with the gun on the desk, staring at Connor with his hands bound. Declan spoke, his voice stripped of emotion. Boss. Just one word. Roman didn't answer. He reached for the gun, his fingers sliding across the cold metal. This was how he'd lived for 18 years. Betrayal meant death. No exceptions. No mercy. That was the law of his world. Then he heard her voice. Don't. Nora stepped into the room, her eyes never leaving Roman. He betrayed us. He almost got Sienna killed. And if you kill him, what does that make you? Like Harrison. Roman's hand tightened. This is my world. My law. Nora didn't back down. Then changed the law. Roman stared at her, his gaze fierce. If I let him live, he'll talk. He'll give Harrison everything. Nora answered with steady calm. Then let him talk to the FBI. Make him a witness. Use his betrayal against Harrison. Declan raised an eyebrow and muttered that it actually wasn't stupid. Roman looked at Nora. She was challenging the way he'd lived his entire life. She was asking him to do something he had never done. Give up control. Put faith in the law. Put faith in something bigger than his own power. You want me to hand him to the feds. I want you to win the right way. So when it's over, you can look in the mirror and not feel disgusted with yourself. The room fell into silence again. Roman stood there, looking at the gun, looking at Connor, looking at Nora. He thought about the last 18 years. The blood on his hands. The lives he had ended. The nights he couldn't sleep because the ghosts wouldn't let him. He had built this empire on violence, but violence had never given him peace. Finally, he pushed the gun aside. Take him to Brennan. He'll talk to the FBI. Everything he knows. Connor's eyes went wide, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. You're letting me live. Roman didn't look at him. He looked at Nora. No. I'm letting her decide. Connor was dragged out. Declan followed, but before he reached the door, he turned back and looked at Roman with something hard to read. Maybe surprise. Maybe respect. Then he closed the door, leaving Roman and Nora alone. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Roman stood there, staring down at the gun on the desk. You just changed the way I do everything I've done for 18 years. Nora met his gaze. Is that a complaint? Roman turned fully toward her, his eyes locking onto hers. No, it's a confession. You make me want to be someone else. Nora didn't know what to say. She stood there, her heart beating faster, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them. Something was changing between them. Not just allies anymore. Not just a deal anymore. Something deeper, stronger, and more frightening. She didn't know what it was, but she knew she didn't want it to stop. Harrison Blake went mad when he learned Connor had been taken. He knew the traitor would tell the FBI everything, knew his time was running out, and when a beast is cornered, it strikes with everything it has left. That night, Harrison hired a team of elite mercenaries, not ordinary gunmen, but men who'd fought in war zones all over the world. His order was simple. Attack. Kill them all. Leave no one alive. At 2 o'clock in the morning, while the entire estate was sunk in sleep, they broke in. The first gunshot tore through the quiet night. Then came screaming, running footsteps, shattering glass. Roman's people reacted fast. They'd been trained for situations like this, but the enemy was more numerous and better armed than anyone had expected. A short but brutal firefight exploded across the first floor of the mansion. Roman sprinted to Nora and Sienna's room the moment he heard the first shot. He kicked the door open, gun in hand, eyes sweeping the space to make sure they were safe. Follow me. Right now. They ran down the corridor, gunfire echoing from every direction. Roman went first, using his body as a shield for the two women behind him. A mercenary appeared at the corner of the hallway. Roman dropped him before he could even aim, but then another burst of bullets came from behind. In the chaos, one round grazed Nora's arm. She cried out in pain and pitched forward. Blood began to soak through her sleeve. Sienna moved instantly. She didn't stand there waiting to be saved the way she once would have. She dragged Nora into a nearby room and slammed the door shut. Stay with me. You're going to be fine. For the first time in her life, Sienna was protecting someone instead of being protected. She tore a strip of fabric from her own shirt and wrapped it around Nora's arm to stop the bleeding. Her hands shook, but her movements were decisive. The change in her had started long ago. Now it was showing. Outside, the fight ended quickly. Declan and the others drove the attackers back. The bodies of the mercenaries lay scattered throughout the mansion, but Roman didn't care about victory. He stormed into the room where Sienna and Nora were hiding, and when he saw the blood on Nora's arm, he froze. No. Declan followed, checking the wound quickly. It's just a graze. She'll be fine. But Roman didn't hear him. He dropped to his knees beside Nora, tore away the crude cloth, and began to bandage her carefully with his own hands. His hands were shaking, something that had never happened. The hands of Roman Callahan, a man who had killed more people than anyone could count, who had faced death more times than he could remember, were trembling as he held the roll of gauze. Nora looked at him and saw panic in eyes that were usually cold as ice. Roman, I'm fine. Look at me. He lifted his head, wild-eyed, not a trace of calm left in him. This shouldn't have happened. None of this should. Nora cut him off. It's just a scratch. Roman shook his head, his voice breaking. This isn't just a scratch. This is my fault. You're bleeding because of me. Nora raised her hand and laid it against his cheek. The first time she'd touched him like that. The first time she'd felt the warmth of his skin under her palm. He went still beneath that touch, as if she'd found a deep wound he'd hidden for far too long. "I'm still here." They looked at each other in silence. The world around them seemed to stop. No more gunfire. No more blood. Only two people trying to find something in each other's eyes. That night, Roman didn't leave Nora's room. He sat in the chair beside her bed, his gaze never leaving her for even a second. The doctor came, dressed the wound properly, and said she would heal completely, but Roman still didn't go. Nora woke at 3 o'clock in the morning and sensed someone in the room. She turned and saw him sitting there in the dark, his eyes still on her. "You stayed." Roman didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, and when he spoke, his voice went rough. "I'll always stay." There was no kiss, no confession. But they both knew something had changed forever between them. An invisible thread had been pulled tight, and neither of them wanted to cut it. From the doorway, Sienna stood quietly watching. She looked at her brother, the man she had always believed was untouchable, sitting guard over a woman with a look she had never seen before. She smiled softly. For the first time in a long time, Roman realized something as he sat there watching Nora sleep. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was his weakness. And that scared him more than any enemy he had ever faced. But he knew something else, too. He couldn't let her go now, no matter what that meant. The next morning, Nora woke with her arm still aching. She looked around the room and saw that the chair where Roman had sat all night was empty now. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, signaling that a new day had begun. She got up, deciding to check on her mother before she did anything else. Margaret needed to know her daughter was all right, that the injury wasn't serious. But when Nora reached her mother's room, the door was wide open and the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, with no sign that anyone had been there at all. Nora's heart began to pound faster. She ran into the hallway and found the private doctor walking toward her. "Where's my mother?" The doctor looked confused. "She wasn't here when I arrived this morning. I assumed she'd been moved somewhere else." Nora stood frozen, the blood in her veins turning to ice. "What do you mean she isn't here?" Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. She opened it, and the world collapsed beneath her feet. A photograph. Her mother sat on a wooden chair in a dark room, her hands tied behind her back, her eyes blindfolded with a strip of black cloth. She looked so small, so fragile, it hurt to breathe. The message beneath it was as cold as a death sentence. "Drop everything. Withdraw your testimony. Disappear. If you don't, she'll die slowly." The phone slipped from Nora's hand. She screamed, a sound that tore through her throat. Raw, with pain and despair, she punched the wall, kicked at anything in her path, her body shaking beyond control. "They took my mother. They took my mother." Roman came running when he heard her. He saw the phone on the floor, saw the photo on the screen, and his face darkened. Nora crumpled down, both hands clamped over her head. "I shouldn't have done this. I should have stayed quiet. I should have kept being invisible." Her voice broke into pieces. "My mother has nothing to do with this. She's already dying from illness. She couldn't finish. Tears poured out, for the first time since all of this began. Nora Sullivan, the woman who had stood her ground against Harrison Blake, who had endured every threat and every danger, finally fell apart. Because this was her greatest fear. Someone she loved being hurt because of her. Roman dropped to his knees beside her and pulled her into his arms. Short, steady, strong. "Look at me. We're going to bring her back." Nora lifted her head, eyes red, her voice desperate. "How? Harrison has the FBI, the police. He has." Roman set both hands on her shoulders and looked her straight in the eyes. "And I have an army. This is my world, remember." His voice was ice cold, but inside it, she knew he was burning. "They made a mistake. They brought the war to my home." He stood and pulled out his phone, already making calls. "Declan, gather everyone. Now." Within minutes, the mansion turned into organized chaos. Roman's people appeared from everywhere, taking orders and moving out. Declan stood before Roman, waiting for instruction. "Find Margaret Sullivan. Every source, every contact, every dollar." Immediately, Declan nodded. "And Harrison." Roman looked out the window, his eyes as dark as a moonless night. "He dies last, after he watches everything he built burn to ash." Nora stood, wiping her tears away. She stepped up beside Roman, her voice shaking but filled with resolve. "I'm coming with you." Roman turned to her. "No, it's too dangerous. That's my mother. I'm going." Roman tried to stop her. "Nora." She cut him off, her eyes on fire. "You said you'd protect my family. Let me fight for them." They stared at each other. For the first time, Roman couldn't win an argument with her. He saw the determination in her eyes, saw a flame nothing could put out. And he understood that if he held her back, he'd lose her in a different way. "Stay behind me. Do exactly what I say." Nora nodded. "All right." Roman paused and took her hand. His hand was warm and steady, giving her the strength she needed. "And Nora," he looked into her eyes, "I'll burn this whole city down before I let anything happen to her. Or to you." Nora tightened her grip on his hand and didn't speak. She didn't need to. They set out into the night, and they both knew that tonight would change everything. 2 hours later, Declan called with news. "We found her. The warehouse district in South Boston. 4 guards." Roman's brow tightened. "Only 4. Declan's voice came back through the phone. "Blake thinks we won't dare to risk it. He's wrong." They moved immediately. 3 black cars cut through the night, heading toward an abandoned industrial stretch on the edge of the city. When they arrived, Roman ordered Nora to stay in the car. She nodded, but the moment he walked away, she knew she couldn't sit still. Not when her mother was in there. Not when every second that passed could be the last. Quietly, she opened the door and followed Roman's team into the dark. The warehouse was an old, decaying building, brick walls peeling, windows shattered. A thin glow from inside said someone was there. Roman signaled his men forward. They fanned out like ghosts, without a sound, without a trace. Nora crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching everything. She saw Roman go in first, gun in hand, every step steady and deliberate. Then everything happened fast. The first shot cracked the night open. 1 guard went down, then a second, a third. The clash was short, violent, and absolute. Nora watched Roman fight, and it wasn't anything like the movies. There were no flashy moves, no cool one-liners, only pure brutality and lethal efficiency. Roman moved like a machine built to destroy. He didn't hesitate. He didn't show mercy. Every strike, every shot, was precise and final. She saw him snap one man's wrist, kick another to the ground, drop the last one before he could even reach the trigger. Nora saw both sides of Roman that night. The monster everyone feared, and the protector who would do anything to keep the people he loved safe. She wasn't afraid. Strangely, she understood. This was how he kept the ones he loved alive. This was the only language his world understood. When the last gunshot faded, Nora ran inside. She found her mother in a small room at the back of the warehouse. Margaret sat on a wooden chair, her hands still bound, her eyes still covered. She was weak and pale, but alive. Alive. Nora dropped to her knees and fumbled with the ropes, her hands shaking. "Mom. Mom, it's me." Margaret heard her daughter's voice, and tears began to slide down her cheeks as the blindfold was pulled away. "Nora, I knew you'd come." Nora wrapped her arms around her mother and sobbed like a child. All the fear, all the worry, all the guilt she'd been carrying poured out with the tears. Her mother was safe. Her mother was still here. Roman stood in the doorway, watching the reunion. He didn't step inside. His hands were stained with blood, his clothes smeared with dust and red. He felt too filthy to touch something as sacred as that moment. But then Nora stood. She walked to him without hesitation, without a second thought. She took his hand, the hand still marked with the blood of the men he'd just killed. "Thank you. For everything." Roman looked down at his hand in hers. For the first time in his life, someone touched him after seeing the monster inside, and didn't recoil in disgust. On the ride back, Margaret fell asleep in the back seat. Exhausted but safe, Declan drove, eyes fixed forward. Nora and Roman sat side by side in silence. "I saw who you are tonight. All of it." Roman didn't look at her. And I'm still here." He turned, and something in his eyes broke open. Not pain. Hope. The thing he'd given up a long time ago. Nora rested her head on his shoulder, just for a brief moment. "Don't push me away after this." Roman was quiet for a long time. Then he said, his voice rough, "I don't think I could do that even if I wanted to." His hand found hers, holding tight, and he didn't let go for the rest of the drive. 2 weeks later, Harrison Blake was brought to trial in federal court in Boston. The charges stacked up one after another: domestic violence, money laundering, complicity in human trafficking, kidnapping. Connor had told the FBI everything, handing over proof of every illegal operation Harrison had run for years. Audrey Chen had aired her investigative report, exposing the real monster behind the flawless mask of a perfect politician. And now, all of America was watching. The courthouse was packed tight with reporters and media crews from everywhere. Cameras pointed in every direction, flashbulbs popping without pause whenever anyone stepped through the courthouse doors. This was the biggest trial of the year, maybe of the entire decade. A senator, a future presidential candidate, was facing charges that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. Nora stood outside the courtroom, drawing in a deep breath to steady herself. She would be one of the most important witnesses. Her video had started it all. And now she had to stand in front of hundreds of people, in front of television cameras, and tell what she had seen. Her heart hammered. Her hands were ice cold. Roman stepped up beside her and didn't say anything at first. He just stood there. His presence felt like an invisible shield, protecting her from the curious stares around them. What if they don't believe me? Roman looked at her, his gaze calm and certain. They'll believe you. Nora gave a thin, bitter smile. You sound so sure. Roman leaned closer, his mouth near her ear, his voice low and warm in a way she'd never heard from him before. No matter what happens in there, I'm proud of you. I've never met anyone braver. Nora looked at him, her pulse stumbling hard in her chest. She wanted to say something, wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him she felt something too, but no words came. She only nodded, then walked into the courtroom. Harrison Blake sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, hair neatly combed, still wearing confidence, as if this were nothing more than a minor obstacle on his road to the White House. His powerful team of lawyers sat around him, faces cold and professional. When Harrison saw Nora enter, he curled his mouth into a sneer. That smile said he still believed he would win, that a poor waitress could never defeat a powerful senator. Nora was called to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth and only the truth. Then the questioning began. Harrison's lawyer attacked immediately, his voice sharp as a blade. Miss Sullivan, isn't it true you were fired for misconduct? Nora kept her voice steady. I was fired for refusing to stand there and watch a man hit his pregnant wife. The lawyer didn't let go. You have significant debt. Isn't it possible you made all of this up for money? Yes, I'm poor. But being poor doesn't make me a liar. The lawyer leaned forward, his tone heavy with insinuation. You are currently living under the protection of a notorious criminal. How can we trust anything you say? Nora looked him straight in the eye, her voice ringing clearly through the hush of the room. Roman Callahan saved my mother when your client had her kidnapped. So yes, I trust him more than I trust your client. The jury nodded. A few people in the gallery whispered under their breath. Harrison's lawyer went pale, with no way to strike back. Then the video was played on the large screen in the courtroom. The sound of the slap cracked through the silence. The image of Sienna falling to the floor, blood on her lip, one hand clutching her pregnant belly. Harrison standing over her as if she were nothing at all. The entire courtroom sank into absolute silence. Harrison's face went white as death. When Nora stepped down from the witness stand, she passed Sienna, who was seated and waiting for her turn. Nora stopped and took Sienna's hand for one brief second. You can do this. Sienna nodded, her eyes calm in a way Nora had never seen before. She stood and walked toward the witness stand. Sienna climbed up and faced her former husband for the first time since that fateful night. Harrison looked at her with a threatening stare, the same stare that had once made her shake and fall silent for 3 years. But Sienna didn't tremble. She wasn't afraid anymore. Sienna stood on the witness stand, facing a room packed with people. Her voice trembled, but every word rang out clear as a bell. 3 years. 3 years of hell. She didn't give a long, detailed account. She didn't need to. Each sentence was like a blade slicing through the charged air of the courtroom. He hit me for the first time on our honeymoon. I thought it was my fault. He told me no one would believe me, that I was nothing without him. Sienna stopped and drew a deep breath, and I believed him, until someone showed me who he really was. She turned and looked at Nora, eyes wet, filled with gratitude. She saved my life. Harrison couldn't take it anymore. He shot to his feet, slammed his hand on the table, and shouted with a frantic, unhinged voice, She's lying. She's my wife. She. The judge brought the gavel down, her stern voice cutting through the courtroom. Sit down, Mr. Blake. This is your final warning. Harrison's lawyer yanked him back into his chair, hissing something in his ear, but the damage was done. The jury had seen it. The whole country watching on television had seen it. For the first time, Harrison Blake looked truly afraid. But the trial wasn't over, and the worst thing for Harrison still hadn't come. The judge spoke again, calm but commanding. The prosecution calls the next witness. The courtroom doors opened. A woman walked in, escorted by 2 FBI agents. She was around 30, dark-haired, olive-skinned, moving with the steady determination of someone who had waited a long time for this moment. Harrison saw her and went white as a corpse. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. This was Elena Vasquez, one of the people who had vanished after threatening to expose Harrison. Everyone had believed she was dead, Harrison included, but she wasn't dead. The FBI had found her, protected her for 3 years, waiting until they had enough evidence to bring Harrison to justice. And now Elena stood on the witness stand, ready to tell everything. I worked for Senator Blake's campaign in 2019. Her voice was calm, but heavy with force. I discovered the money laundering, the ties to the trafficking ring. I tried to report it. He threatened my family. Then he sent men to my apartment. I ran. The FBI found me. They've been building this case ever since. Then Elena presented evidence, an audio recording of Harrison ordering another witness to be handled, a list of officials who had been bought, account numbers where dirty money had been sent. Each piece of evidence was another nail driven into Harrison's coffin. Harrison's attorney stood, voice tight with panic. We request a continuance to review this new evidence. The judge looked at him with cold eyes. Request denied. The trial will proceed. The jury stared at Harrison the way you look at a monster. There was no reverence left for a respectable senator, only disgust and horror. The gallery buzzed. Reporters scribbled like mad. And outside the courthouse, across the nation, millions watched Audrey Chen's investigative report airing at the same time as the trial. Every secret Harrison had was dragged into the light. There was nowhere left to hide. During a recess, Harrison passed by Nora. He stopped, eyes burning with hatred, his voice a hiss like a snake. You ruined me. Nora stood tall and looked straight into the eyes of the man who had once terrified her. But she wasn't afraid anymore. No, you ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it. Harrison stood there for a moment, as if he wanted to say more, but officers moved in to take him away. Nora watched until he disappeared behind the doors. Then she stepped outside, her heart still pounding hard in her chest. Roman was waiting in the hallway. He didn't speak when he saw her. He only opened his arms, and Nora stepped into them. Let him hold her, let his strength and warmth wrap around her. It's almost over, she whispered into his shoulder. Roman held her tighter, his mouth brushing her hair. Yes, it's almost over. 3 hours. 3 long, endless hours of waiting while the jury deliberated. Nora sat in the courtroom, gripping Sienna's hand so tightly her fingers ached, her heart pounding as if it wanted to break free of her ribs. Roman stood behind them, silent as a statue, but she could feel the tension rolling off him. The entire courtroom held its breath. No one dared to move. No one dared to speak. Then the door opened. The jurors filed in, one by one, their faces unreadable. They took their seats, and the foreperson rose, a sheet of paper in hand. The judge spoke, her voice echoing through the silence. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. We have, on the charge of domestic violence. The foreperson glanced down, then looked up. Guilty. Nora felt as if someone had clamped a fist around her heart. But it wasn't over. On the charge of money laundering. Guilty. On the charge of complicity in human trafficking. Guilty. On the charge of kidnapping. Guilty. Harrison Blake, guilty on all counts. The judge brought the gavel down and sentenced him to 30 years in federal prison. No possibility of parole. Noise erupted in the courtroom. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed wildly. But Nora heard none of it. She sat there, frozen, unable to believe it was real. They'd won. They had truly won. Sienna broke down beside her. Tears of release after 3 years of hell. She turned and threw her arms around Roman, and for the first time in so many years, she held her brother without fear, without hesitation. Harrison lurched to his feet as officers moved in to cuff him, his face twisted with rage, eyes bloodshot like a cornered animal. This isn't over. You hear me. This isn't over. But the officers hauled him away. His voice faded behind the closing door. And Harrison Blake, the powerful senator, the presidential hopeful, vanished from the public light forever. Outside the courthouse, a a crowd had been waiting. Hundreds of people stood on the steps. And when the verdict spread, they began to chant, "Justice, justice, justice." The press surged forward, flashbulbs popping without pause. Audrey Chen stood before the cameras, reporting live to millions watching. Today, a senator fell, and a waitress from New Orleans proved that no one stands above the truth. Nora, Roman, and Sienna stood outside the courthouse, separate from the chaotic crowd. The three of them stayed quiet for a moment, letting it sink in, down to the bone. Sienna looked at her brother, her eyes still wet. "We did it." Roman shook his head, looking at his sister, then at Nora. "Not me." "You did. Both of you." Sienna stepped forward and hugged Roman. Not a brief, awkward embrace like the ones they'd traded over the years, but the embrace of a sister who had finally found her brother again, of a woman finally set free. Nora stood beside them, smiling as she watched the two siblings. And over Sienna's shoulder, Roman looked at her. His eyes said everything he couldn't put into words. Sienna let go, smiled at them both, then walked off to speak with Audrey. Only Roman and Nora remained, standing there amid the noise, amid the flashing lights, amid the gaze of a world watching. Roman stepped closer and pulled her into his arms. Right there in public, no hiding, no cover. For the first time, he didn't care who was looking. "It's over," Nora whispered into his shoulder. Roman held her tighter, his voice low and warm. "No, this is the end of his story." He eased back just enough to look down at her, and the eyes that had once been ice now held emotions she couldn't name. "Our story is only beginning." Nora couldn't find words. She only nodded, eyes burning with tears, her throat tight. They stood there a little longer, between chaos and victory, between an ending and a beginning. And for the first time in her life, Nora Sullivan felt she wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen, by the whole world watching, and more than that, by the man holding her in his arms. 6 months have passed since the day Harrison Blake was sentenced. 6 months of change, of new beginnings, of wounds slowly learning how to close. Sienna gave birth to a healthy baby boy and named him Liam Callahan. Not Blake, never Blake again. She began working with an organization that supports victims of domestic violence, using her own story to help other women who are still suffering in silence. Sienna is stronger than she's ever been, like a flower that has endured the harshest winter and still found the courage to bloom. Margaret, Nora's mother, received good news from the doctor. The cancer has reached a stable stage. She lives with Nora now in a new apartment, clean and safe, no longer the shabby studio room from before. Ethan is about to graduate from medical school, the dream Nora sacrificed everything to protect. Her brother holds her hand on the day of his upcoming graduation, eyes wet with tears. "I'll spend my whole life paying you back." Nora only smiles and shakes her head. "Just be a good doctor. That's all I need." And Nora? She's gone back to law school on a full scholarship. She chose to focus on law that protects victims of domestic violence, turning pain into purpose, turning experience into strength. Her life is better than it's ever been. But there's an emptiness, an absence she feels every day. Roman. He kept his distance after the trial. No phone calls, no visits, not a single message. Nora hears about him through Sienna, knows he's still doing well, still running his empire, but he doesn't contact her directly. Not once. She doesn't understand why. One day, Nora asks Sienna while they're drinking coffee, "Did I do something wrong?" Sienna sighs and sets her cup down. "He thinks you deserve better." Better than what? Better than him. A criminal. A killer. A man with blood on his hands. Nora falls silent, but something inside her begins to crack. That same day, Sienna goes to see Roman at the estate. "You're pushing her away." Roman doesn't lift his eyes from the stack of papers on his desk. "I'm protecting her. From my world. From me." Sienna steps closer and makes him look at her. "She walked into your world by her own choice. She's seen everything. She stayed." Roman shakes his head, his voice tired. "She deserves sunlight, not darkness." Sienna's anger flashes, her voice turning sharp and cold. "She doesn't love sunlight, Roman. She loves you. And if you let her go because you're afraid, then you're more of a coward than Harrison." Roman stands there as if he's been slapped. Sienna doesn't wait for an answer. She turns and leaves, abandoning him to the hollow quiet of an empty room. Roman sits down and takes out his phone. He opens his photo library and looks at the only picture of her he's kept, Nora smiling. The day they won the trial, sunlight catching in her hair. She's so beautiful it hurts to breathe. And he let her go. For the first time, he asks himself the question he's been avoiding. Is he protecting her, or is he running? That night, Roman stands in front of the bathroom mirror. He looks into his own eyes, into the face of a man who has killed more people than he can count, yet feels fear when it comes to one girl. Coward, he says to his reflection. Then he steps out, takes his car keys, and goes. Boston Law School, late afternoon. Roman stood outside the gate, waiting. He wore a black suit, his face hard and distant, clearly someone who didn't belong here. Students passed by and stared at him, whispering to each other, but he didn't care. He had only one purpose: find her. Then Nora appeared. She stepped out of the main building, books tucked in her arms, hair pulled into a high ponytail, looking like a completely different woman from the waitress in a wrinkled uniform years ago, stronger, more confident. And when she saw Roman standing there, she stopped short. They looked at each other across the wide courtyard. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Nora turned and walked away, faster, as if she meant to run. Nora, wait. She didn't stop. Roman hurried after her and caught her hand. Please. Nora spun back, her eyes burning with the anger she'd been holding inside for 6 months. 6 months. Not one word. Roman looked at her, his chest ripping open with pain. I know. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't explain why you disappeared. Roman drew a deep breath. I thought you deserved better. Better than what? Better than me. A man with blood on his hands. A man who lives in the dark. Nora stared at him like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. So you decided for me. Without asking me what I wanted. Roman fell silent. He had no answer for that. Nora exploded, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. I didn't ask for a saint, Roman. I didn't ask for someone perfect. I just needed someone to stay, someone to fight for me the way I fought for your sister. But you ran, like everyone else. Her voice broke on the last words. She turned away, not wanting him to see the tears that were ready to spill. I ran because I was afraid. Nora stopped, but she didn't turn back. Roman went on, his voice rough. Not afraid of Harrison, not afraid of death. Afraid of this, afraid of wanting you, afraid of losing you, afraid of being happy. He took one step closer, then another. I've lost everyone I've ever loved. My father, my mother. I almost lost Sienna. I thought if I stayed away, you'd be safe. But I was lying to myself. He stopped right behind her, his voice dropping into a whisper. I stayed away because I don't know how to love someone without destroying them. Nora turned slowly. Her eyes were red, but the anger was gone now. What remained was pain, and a question. Then what now? Roman stepped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. Now I know I'd rather risk ruining us than live one more day without you. He lifted a hand and touched her cheek, gentle as if he were afraid she might break. I'm not a good man, Nora, but I want to be. For you. Nora didn't speak. She only looked at him, into eyes that had once been ice and were now burning with something she'd never seen before. Then she stepped forward, grabbed his suit lapel, and pulled him down. Their mouths met in the middle of the courtyard, beneath a sunset that painted the Boston sky red. Roman went still for a heartbeat, as if he couldn't believe it was happening. Then he wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight as if she might vanish, as if this might only be a dream. They kissed for a long time, deep and hungry. The world around them stopped existing. No more students passing by, no more curious stares. Only two people who had found each other after so much darkness and hurt. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless. Nora rested her forehead against his chest and whispered, "Don't ever disappear again." Roman set his forehead to hers, his voice thick and rough. "Never." He was quiet for a moment, then he added, "I can't promise you a normal life." Nora laughed, the first laugh in 6 months that truly came from her heart. "I've never had a normal life. Why start now?" 1 year later, Nora Sullivan graduates from Boston Law School with highest honors. She becomes a human rights attorney, devoted to defending victims of domestic violence. But that isn't all. Together with Sienna, she founds the Light Foundation, a non-profit organization that supports women who are suffering in silence the way Sienna once suffered. The foundation's headquarters is a small building in East Boston, not far from where Nora used to live in that shabby studio apartment years ago. The opening ceremony takes place on a bright, sunny day. A red ribbon, fresh flowers, and tears of happiness. Nora stands before the crowd, the people who have come to witness this moment, and she begins to speak. I used to be a waitress who couldn't afford medicine for my mother. They said no one would believe me. They told me to stay invisible. But I'm still here, and so are you. The crowd applauds, many wiping away tears. Sienna stands in the front row with Liam in her arms, the baby boy now 1 year old, healthy, and carrying the Callahan name. Margaret, Nora's mother, stands beside her daughter, her eyes full of pride and emotion. She is much stronger now, her cancer still in a stable stage. Ethan stands beside their mother, now a resident physician at a major hospital in Boston. Audrey Chen is there as well, having been promoted to senior editor after her series of explosive investigative reports. And Roman, he stands in the back, smiling, his eyes never leaving Nora for even a second. After the ceremony, a young woman comes to Nora. She is about 20 years old, thin, but there is light in her eyes, the light of someone who has made it through the dark. I watched your video 2 years ago. I was in a similar situation. You gave me the courage to leave, to survive. Nora embraces the girl, her own eyes reddening. You saved yourself. I only showed you it was possible. That night, Roman and Nora sit on the balcony of the estate, looking out at the city of Boston glittering with lights. You changed everything. You know that. Nora shakes her head, smiling. No, I just refuse to become invisible. Roman looks at her, his eyes full of love. And in the end, someone finally saw you. Nora turns toward the man who changed her life and smiles. Yes, someone saw me. They kiss beneath the moonlight. Two people from different worlds who found each other in the storm. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to disappear. Sometimes a single voice is enough to begin a revolution. And sometimes, the most dangerous man in the room is the very one who teaches you how to shine. Nora Sullivan's story has ended, but her message will echo on. That no one has the right to stand above the truth, that silence is never the answer, and that each of us deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be loved. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that their voice has value. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss moving stories every day. We want to know how you feel about this story. Did it remind you of anything in real life? Have you ever witnessed someone bravely stand up for what's right? Please share your feelings in the comments below. We truly want to hear the thoughts that come from deep in your heart. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end of the video. Wishing everyone watching good health, a life filled with joy, and peaceful days ahead. The silent witness became a revolution. Now it's your turn to be seen. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.